Well, I can't give away real numbers from
Yeah,
NBC, but I can tell you like animation general numbers. We were producing, you can produce, I should say this, you can produce content. Um, you're more interested in animation, correct? Versus live action?
yeah, I'm more
Yeah.
interested in animation.
Okay. So animation for me was produced on in a range in a very wide range from 200,000 a half hour to 900,000 a half hour. That's a very broad range. There's different aspects of why they take that number goes up or down. Usually goes up with known IP, not always though. Usually goes up with high-end CGI or extremely like beautiful detailed animation
Mm,
can bring that number up. But some of the lower end things that I was doing or have produced at, those numbers, you'd be surprising the quality that you can get out. It just
mhm.
takes more oversight and commitment from the showrunner, the executive, the team in general to make something look good at a lower price point.
Welcome to NOVA Podcast, a show where we delve into the world of business, marketing, and 3D technologies, exploring its creative magic and the business that brings it to life. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Kristofer Updike, who has been a creative executive developing, producer, and delivering scripted, unscripted, animated, and live action entertainment properties, as well as delivering over a combined 500 hours of content in the past 15 years. So, Kristofer, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's dive right in. What initially drew you to the world of production, especially in the kids and young adults audiences?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to jump in here. Um, yeah, so ever since I was a young boy, I think I really realized that I wanted to be doing theater and acting and production and directing. And so from a very young age, I started to uh, put on plays on my own and take classes in theater. So my background tends to revolve around theater. So I went to undergraduate and I have an undergraduate degree in theater, film, and art from Albright College. And then I went straight into a master's degree for acting at Rutgers University, Mason Gross School of the Arts. During that entire time while I was there, I was able to make contacts with people and uh, I created some films with friends. I started a theater company with alums from Rutgers and really just delved into that whole world. After my master's degree, I moved to New York and I got a job. I'm going to give you a little past if that's
Yes.
okay. Yeah, I got a job in as an assistant to a textile design designer and really like dove into that world as well. And I realized as I was doing that, I was also acting, I was producing, I wrote a screenplay with my brother, I developed projects for kids. And really what happened was along about that time, my brother and I wrote a screenplay that someone who we didn't know reached out and said, "Oh, like I really like this and I want to option it." And so that sort of started the path more from switching out of that textile design that I had been doing and into more a production based opportunity. So I quickly moved from New York to LA and I started working for an amazing company called Bix Fix Entertainment. They're mostly known for the series Miro and and on Amazon.
Okay.
Sorry, I was trying to like, what's my past? And I really, we I really and oh, by the way, sorry. They're known for a series called Tumbleleaf on Amazon. When I worked for the company, it was called Moreau. Thank
Oh.
you. Sorry about that. So I worked for that company, and I was able to do production and development and produce many things across the board for kids and family. The whole thing that makes me excited about production and development is really about collaboration and humor. I've always been interested in those two things as ways, and sometimes that is for kids, and sometimes that's for adults. And I think humor sort of ties us all together in many ways. And so that's really what my love of that where that came out of. So essentially after Bix Pix Entertainment, I moved back to the East Coast. I got a job not too long after working for a linear cable channel called Sprout. And Sprout was for preschoolers. And I was brought in to produce the first original series that they were doing. Sprout originally started as um, there was four partnerships in it. It was Sesame Kids, it was Hit Entertainment, it was Comcast. Um, and so what it was known for was more second library, like bringing on a second library to the of content to do that. And so what I was brought in was to do an original show. And so I produced an original show called Noodle and Doodle, and I post-produced that as well. And during that process, they decided that they wanted to go deeper into development. And so they hired me as their manager of development. And I started working alongside the executives there. It was very exciting. It was kind of like working at a startup.
Okay.
And it was, although at the time Sprout had been like about 5 years old, they had been doing lots of content before me. But when they started original content, it was really fun. It felt like a startup, and really working closely with my colleagues and so forth. Eventually, as you may or may not know, Comcast bought NBC. And so they took all of the Philadelphia-based um, uh, channels, and they moved them either to LA or New York. And we were chosen to move to New York, and we were put under the NBC umbrella. Um, Eventually, Sprout in 2016 became Universal Kids with a mandate to do both preschool and 6 to 12 content. And so at that point in my career, I started really working on animation, live action scripted, live action unscripted content. It was a really exciting time. And then eventually I moved from Universal Kids to Peacock, which is where I was for the last 3 years is at Peacock, and their mandate was to really build out a children's uh, portion of the platform. And so at the moment, I'm no longer at Peacock. I am, knock on wood, hopefully accepting my next position very soon. I'll let you all know when that happens. I can't say
Please.
anything.
Oh, Christopher, I have a question.
Yeah.
While you were talking about that, what are some of the key qualities you look for when developing new content for children and families?
Yeah, I think for me, it's always about the characters and the stories. Are they engaging? Is it entertaining? Does it touch a new way of thinking about for kids? I think for me, I really am drawn into what the characters have to say and how they're relating to the audience. You know, I think it's very important not to speak down to kids, and I think it's very important that kids really they laugh and love humor just as much as
Yeah.
anyone. And so for me, it's about that. I also love, as I said and mentioned, and will mention many times, I really love humor. And
Mhm.
so I really love bringing that sensibility. If you can do it so craftily as you get the kids to enjoy humor as well as their parents or caregivers, I think that's an amazing win.
And
For me,
yeah,
that's an amazing.
and how do you, talking about the humor and all of that, for example, how do you, or what is, how do you strike with the balance of entertainment but also educate the children through this content and through these shows? Like, how do you measure the success of these kids shows? Well, while they're very entertaining, but also they're very in the education part as well.
Yeah, so I have done all sorts of content for kids. I've done purely educational content where it had a very clear curriculum associated with it. I've
Yeah.
done entertainment-based kids projects.
Okay.
Always, there's always some sort of like tie into kids, we call it like social emotional learning. So if it
Okay.
doesn't have a math or science or language learning element to it, and it's not like strictly overtly educational in that way, I've always done things that then are more social emotional. So it might be sharing or caring or feelings and such like
Right.
that. So there's always something there that is a bit of what we might call education. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's not as overt as others. I've done what seems like very like amazing, it could be a toy show kind of like thing, but
Right.
they've always had that core to it. And they've always been about, teaching teaching those social emotional learning methods that kids are into.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And that you mentioned that you were on NBC Universal and you were involved in many projects on there for the kids and the family.
Mhm.
And I would like if you can describe to us what were your major roles there and how do you deal with business development and also strategies, because that is the business side, not only the creative side. And also you have the creative side, you have both, you have the business side and then you have the creative side. So what were the roles in there as a producer with those roles very specifically in NBC Universal?
Yeah. I'll talk a lot about, so I'll talk about the last 3 years at Peacock. I was VP of development and production. And along with my boss, we were tasked with setting a strategy. So we had to set a strategy of how we were going to grow the kids' business, what we
Okay.
were going to do, and what kinds of projects we were going to invest in. In the early beginnings of Peacock, we needed to do some original content that was, for lack of a better word, we had to do something that like really appealed to kids but had a lower price point because we were so new. And then as it grew over the 3 years, we were then sort of like drawing ourselves into more IP-based projects.
Mm.
So, for example, this year, Caillou will come to Peacock. It will be in CG and it will have a new look and feel, but it's an existing property that was out there. So there was a lot of planning and strategy that was involved at the beginning of Peacock, of figuring out how much we were going to do, how big we were going to go. Were we going to do live action? Were we going to do just animation? We ended up doing a nice mixture of both, although in the end, we focused on animation.
Okay.
Um, my day to day was not only that, but it was also working with production companies, directors, producers, writers, they would pitch me projects and I would review them, offer up my suggestions to my boss, and then we would decide to develop them or not. I'm going to just kind of walk you through the process of how it all works.
Yeah, yeah.
I I would then sort of once my boss and I identified and we went to our legal team, we would make an offer on the project. And we would, if there was no writer associated with it, we might search for a writer and bring a writer on board and then develop out that project. Once that project got developed to its fullest potential, then we would put it up for green light. In 3 years at Peacock, I did 14 series.
Wow.
So they were of all different, some were live action scripted, some were unscripted content, most were animation. At any given time, I usually had about 10 to 15 shows in development. So I would be working with the creators or the production companies to develop those projects out and feed our pipeline.
A year? 10 to 15 projects a year?
10 to 15 projects in
Okay.
development a year. And
Okay.
at any given time, in terms of just like the 3 years that I was there, I did 15 projects alone there.
Wow.
That doesn't include Sprout or Universal Kids or anything. But yeah, it was quite an undertaking. I had an amazing coordinator. She was uh, awesome in helping me out, but it was really us two and my boss who was over many things. So I acted almost as the point person, head of kids kind of thing. And he was awesome to give me leeway to help shape this. He had amazing guidance internally from the company and me sort of from the kids' point of view. And we created together a really an amazing slate, if I do say so myself. Those projects are still rolling out now, and he is over them himself. And just awesome guy who really understood. He, interestingly enough, he had young ones of his own, so he really understood some of what they were going through at the time. So in any given day, it was a mixture of strategy, of development, of production, giving notes on scripts, giving notes on animatics, giving notes on animation. It was also dealing internally with the different companies that the different parts of our company. So I would deal with the international distribution team. I would deal with the consumer products team, the legal teams, the marketing teams, the PR teams. We also, Peacock has a kind of like a sister company called Sky Kids in the UK, and I would deal closely with them. In fact, we did 2 or 3 projects together where they were co-productions for both of us. So that's kind of what I did there.
And Kristofer, being a very artistic and creative person and also dealing with the business side, all the strategies and numbers and all the budgeting, I mean, there are many creatives that are like turning into that also because they have that skill of selling like a show or pitching or negotiation or this neuromarketing stuff that they know. How do you evolve on all of that, being a creative and then turning to the business side as well, or inside of the creative industry?
Well, I think one of the things is it happens slowly over time. I did not have that sensibility to begin with. When I was brought into, I think the first real big lesson of that was working at Bixpix Entertainment and working closely with the president of the company to, lay out the financial structures of how things were going to work. But I do think that when I then, after Bixpix and went to NBC, or Sprout slash Universal Kids slash Peacock. I think really that growth trajectory there was slowly over time, learning the business, learning about, well, not just there, I did this at Bixpix and other places, learned budgets and how to read a budget, how to sort of negotiate people's terms. I always worked very closely with amazing people in production and legal. So I never had to bear the burden of all of it. I was able to really work strategically with my partnerships inside the company to do that. But through that, I think you learn a lot. And I'm pretty interested in the financial side. I like to dream big within the limits that we can. because oftentimes I find dreaming big with no limits means lots of disappointment later
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
So understanding the financial parts of it or the business side of things has made me, in my opinion, a better executive so that I can really understand how projects can move forward. We all want
Correct.
them to go forward. So the idea is for everything to go forward.
Correct. Totally correct. And about the animation shows, Kristofer, those 15 projects a year, those shows were pitched to you through creators, and those shows, some of those shows are still on
Yeah.
today. And these shows, roughly how much each episode might cost, like
Yeah.
roughly how much is it cost? Is it better animation, more expensive than live action, or is cheaper? How does that deal?
Well, I can't give away real numbers from
Yeah.
NBC, but I can tell you like animation general numbers. We were producing, you can produce, I should say this, you can produce content. Um, you're more interested in animation, correct? Versus live action?
Yeah, I'm more
Yeah.
interested in animation.
Okay. So animation for me was produced on in a range in a very wide range from 200,000 a half hour to 900,000 a half hour. That's a very broad range. There's different aspects of why they take that number goes up or down. Usually goes up with known IP, not always though. Usually goes up with high-end CGI or extremely like beautiful detailed animation can bring that number up. But some of the lower end things that I was doing or have produced at, those numbers, you'd be surprising the quality that you can get out. It just takes more oversight and commitment from the showrunner, the executive, the team in general to make something look good at a lower price point. But that said, animation is such a wide, and by the way, I won't even, there's animation that can be much more expensive than that. It can be, $2 million a half hour. It just depends. Is it a feature? Is it features can be even more expensive. So it's all about the quality usually pushes the price up, and the subject matter sometimes does as well.
And how does these shows can stand up still today? Because I know some shows for kids, they last like 3, 4 years and then they disappear. And when, like for example, the new show Aang, the Airbender, the
Yeah.
one on Netflix, is now returning. So I was a fan when I was a kid, and now I'm an adult, right? And watching the show. But those shows, they not like disappear because the fans are still there. But how can you stand the show to last longer for our kids? Or
Well,
does they have like a limited time of lifetime?
I think that things change and tastes change throughout. I look at my lifetime and things in the 90s and the early 2000s, those feel dated to a modern audience. It's a little bit more adaptable. Our content is servicing a window. So for preschool, we'll be from 2 to 5 years old. So that content can last a little bit longer because you're getting new audience in all the time. They're growing out of the project, but some new ones are coming in. It just really, not everything stands the test of time. I've watched a series that I adored when I was younger and thought, well, so that's why you see some remakes happening and they'll like bring it up to snuff. Some things are just a matter of time. A great example is Caillou. Caillou is an amazing show. Even when it first aired, it was a 2D series. It had many different formats within 2D. And then when we decided to take it on, we decided to do an 11-minute format in CGI, but really retain the quality of the original animation. Where we did a lot of lifting was the relationship aspect, and sometimes Caillou used to get like people used to say Caillou was whiny, and we really worked hard to make him less of that type of child and more of a curious
Mm.
little boy who is very interested in playing with his friends and family.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of how you do it. I don't think anything lasts forever. I mean, um, there are some timeless things. I will always say certain movies feel timeless. I personally never want to see a remake of Sound of Music, and that's from the 60s. So like I'm like, please don't remake that. Like that is just beautiful as it is.
Yeah.
But with kids content, there is. I mean, there's trends and changing. There is also that distinction between like really educational content versus this social emotional kind of content that I'm talking, or entertainment kind of content. So those feelings and trends change over time.
Right. And Kristofer, also another challenge that what are all the, besides that, because I understand now the lifetime, which is 2 3 years, but now what are some of the biggest hurdles perhaps you face in developing kids content? What are the biggest ones?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is always about the changing attitudes of the business and the
Mhm.
industry at the time. So not, we're in the midst right now of like massive shifts happening. We have everyone has a streamer,
Yeah.
they're trying to figure out what their goal is for kids, for YA, for adult, for, all sorts of audiences. So there's always the like internal battles of how something gets made. I think those are big hurdles. I think there's no limit in terms of creativity. There's so much out there. So many people have amazing voices and creative eyes. They can look at their projects and they can get them out into the world. It's just trying to figure out how to then take it to the next level so it gets seen. YouTube has helped in many ways because YouTube, you can get your content out there, especially if you can draw and you can animate, you can probably put something out there really quickly.
Mhm.
So to me, the hurdles right now is just sort of like the corporate structure and where it's going. So we're pausing for things at the moment.
Right. And what are some trends that you've been seeing in the industry right now? And what has happened and how are you adapting to them as well?
Yeah, I mean, right now the industry is a little bit in a pullback period, and when
Mhm.
you get into a pullback period, things people tend to want to be more careful. So that tends to mean they want less original content and more like IP based content, things that are already out there. Is it a book? Is it
Mhm.
a series, a movie, a reboot? All of those things. So that trend is still continuing a little bit. I do see the light at the end of the tunnel, maybe towards the end of the year, that there will be more ability for original content to surface. There's been some amazing original series. And by the
Yeah.
way, all of the IP that is now IP used to be original. So Paw Patrol was an original at one point. Was uh, before it turned into a global brand. But
Mhm.
but yeah, so I do see a little bit of a pullback in the sense that people want IP based projects.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that fact. That's very interesting. Well, Kristofer, we are almost in the end of the podcast. Thank you for sharing all those precious details. Thank you for sharing your expertise within the industry with us today as well. I mean, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Please, can you give us a final words of inspiration to our audience?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure. I'm sorry if I rambled, but what I would say is if you have an idea or if you have a thought that you want to get out there, don't compromise that. Like go out there, try to bring it, try to show other people it. You just never know where your creativity can land. And I just think it's important to take a deep breath and laugh at the end of the day, and make sure that you stay true to yourself as you're doing all of that.